Pettitt. I'm not going to lie. I'm starting to get a little punchy. I had this idea, did not realize how many 32 is until you got to record 32 chapters after reading 922 pages. But we're on the home stretch. Home stretch. So today, chapter 11, Department of Education. In a lot of ways, I'm very excited that we waited closer to the end of recording for this one because Department of Education of the chapters is probably the one I was the most scared to read, have the most personal experience with, and also the most dumbfounded that I have no idea what the Department of Education does. That is a weird Venn diagram for me, but like all the other chapters, I asked my friends to help, and stupidly, 3 of them volunteered. So, Lance, Mark, and Jennifer are 3 of my friends who have volunteered to read the chapter and let me extrovertly process about whatever it is that I saw. Like some of the chapters, most of my friends do not have to be experts. So if any of you are also procrastinating and did one of the recordings, this is not going to be one of those chapters because the 3 people that are stupidly enough going to have a conversation with me really have a lot of experience from teaching middle school, high school, a collegiate level, lots of education on their own as students, as well as being teachers and administrators in education in the United States. And just buckle up. This is going to be an important one. So we're going to start off first with coming in hot because I love my friends. And typically what happens is they're coming in with some big, oh my God, this is what it says. Or they're critiquing the writing style, which is valid because it's pretty bad all the way across the whole book. We can't help it. We're teachers. Okay, so Mark, I'm going to start with you. What are you coming in hot with? Let's get it off our chest, and then we'll get to what does it actually say.
Yeah. So thank you, Jess, for that. So one thing I like to just get people to think about, like the purpose of the Department of Education, and I'll be brief because I know I have 2 friends on here who are fellow experts. I'll say it that way. But one of the things that the Department of Education does is certainly serve in this role of oversight in a sense, and oversight is limited. Even though you if you read this, you will fail to realize that the states generally fund the majority of their education. So something to a tune, we'll just say around 7% comes from the federal government. And with that, they say to states, we're going to get you to do a number of things. And it's kind of this carrot approach. So we're going to give you money. And if you happen to mess up, we're going to threaten to take the money back. But there are multiple opportunities where states can get it right. The importance about that is going back for a lot of people with the 14th Amendment. If you look at the history of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, this comes out of when African Americans were being deprived of their rights by states. And so anytime we shift too much of someone's rights to the states, there's this idea that they can be deprived of those rights. And so what I always say to my students when we're thinking about school law, there's this concept in the 14th Amendment that's not talked about, this concept of primacy of citizenship. And you want to be recognized as a citizen of the United States first before you want to be recognized, say, as a state of Georgia, for instance, which is my home state. Because historically, the state of Georgia would deny a Black person's their First Amendment rights. And so the 14th Amendment would come in and say, no, you can't do that without due process of the law. So you can't deprive somebody of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness just on some arbitrary thing about the fact that we don't like them and they were, formerly enslaved people. So the federal government says we're going to use that 7% of funding, which tends to be not, it's pretty significant when we think about it, but it's not a huge amount in terms of the total amount. But it's enough for states to listen to what the federal government has to say. And to do that, they protect the rights of students who are particularly vulnerable. For instance, going back to African American students, for instance, where we have issues of disproportionality. So we have an oversight by the Office of Civil Rights to look at those students' rights and say, look, you're suspending a large number of African American students, and we want to come in and say, as a federal government, we're paying attention to that. And so what we're seeing now from Project 2025 to say, oh, no, don't worry about that. Let's just let states handle that, and the federal government needs to be out of that. Well, even though it may sound sexy to some people, there's this caveat that says we've had disproportionality for a long time, and even though we've been working on it, it's happened consistently across several states, and the federal government needs to be there to be that entity to provide oversight. So I'll stop there. I know my colleagues want to jump in on the conversation, and I'm certainly interested in what they have to say and add to it.
Sure, sure, sure. I'm assuming, Jennifer, I'm going to come for you next, but I'm assuming some of the themes in chapters that are going to come up in this conversation is, first off, this is not just logic. This is Heritage Project logic. Very different most of the time.
Yes.
Is by pointing out inequitable opportunities, you are in fact creating inequitable opportunities. So by pointing out that people of color are expelled or suspended at higher rates, their logic is that that is racist because
Yes.
we're pointing out how it compared to white people. Okay, number two, and when we're talking about the 7% funding, we will get into this later because I'm going for Jen, but I just want to point out so that I remember that when we're talking about charter schools and voucher systems, there is a suggestion that this money is going to like tangibly trickle down to each individual kid and each individual family, and that their individual portion of that 7% could be used towards their own tutoring and education choices, which sounds very complicated to implement. I'm going to throw that out there, but that's a thing. All right. Thank you very much, Mark, for a little history and kind of the context, because we're throwing around the 14th Amendment, but not everyone really knows what it means or why, and the importance of being U.S. citizen first, what that means. All right, Jennifer, coming in hot. What is burning a hole in your pocket?
What is burning a hole in my pocket is the implementation of block grants. And the way that the language that the Heritage Foundation uses is reducing regulatory burdens. So they are talking, I want to piggyback on what Mark said, is that they are pushing much more toward going to the state. So the amount of funding that used to be protected and that used to come with some strings through programs such as IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act, and the ADA, no longer will have any strings. And strings attached doesn't always sound like a great thing, but when it comes to federal protections of people, it is absolutely essential, because even with those strings, many districts struggle, many individuals, many states, and certainly federally, we struggle with the equal and fair treatment of people, specifically people who require and should have our protection. What it says about the implementation of block grants is it will replace a federal funding with a block grant to a state. Now, during COVID, many states saw, and prior to COVID, they saw what were called accountability block grants, where they would give a large chunk of money to a district. The district could decide what to do with it, and there would be accountability for how they decided to spend it. This is really just kind of like, here's some cash. Do with it what you will. There are no strings attached. You can spend it how you want. And if you mess up in the meantime, if you suspend a disproportionate amount of African Americans, if you are really screwing up with your special education population, and if you are trampling on the rights of students, it's okay. We're just going to still let you have it.
Right. The piece there that I think it's horrifying, I think it would be the Jeopardy column, is that because it's focusing so much on individual choice, not choice about what women do with their bodies, not that kind
choice.
of
Not that choice.
No. You move. Just pick up your whole family. If they no longer offer special education, then your family gets to choose to go to a school that doesn't have special education, or you move to a school that does have it. But it also emphasizes home ownership as the main place for families to build wealth, which of course is the most important thing in the American dream. And it defines families as heterosexual males and females, where the male is the breadwinner and the female is the caretaker. No boyfriends allowed. And there's a slight mention of like grandparents, multi generation caretaking in the DHHS chapter, but that's it. and it's only married, heterosexually married men and women who have conceived their own children. That's a family that they get to bypass wealth development or equity development to pick a school that they choose to. That's choice. It's free market economy. Knock yourself out. That's the kind of thought process. The last thing I'm going to say about what Jennifer said, which were great points, Lance, to you next, here we come, is when she talked about ADA and IDEA idea, in case you're interested or have any kind of like work limitations related to like physical disabilities, if you are within a working age, which will then be up to the discretion of your local municipality or state and not mandated by federal law, what is considered a working age. But if you are within the working age, you don't receive aid because you should work. And if for some reason you are somehow loopholing your way through and receiving aid, it will have a date, even if you still have whatever problem qualified you for that aid. You can only have it for a limited amount of time, so get to work. Just want to thank you for that little shout out of terrifying. Lance, what's burning a hole in your little gerbil pocket?
Well, I mean, the first thing I want to say is there's not a lot I can add in the areas that Mark and Jennifer shared, and I really appreciate the framing. A couple things that are near to me right here in the work I'm doing every day as an assistant superintendent. One is the revocation of impact aid to districts. So I'm sure most people won't understand what that is, but if you have a large portion of the land that is inside your district that is owned by the federal government, it's not taxable in the normal ways that we would get our money to be able to support a district. So we receive money from the federal government. That includes, most important for us, Native American reservations. And so I'm in Flagstaff, Arizona. We're adjacent to the Navajo Nation, the largest reservation in the United States, and a very significant portion of our student population are Navajo. And we would lose a significant amount of impact aid for our schools because we would not receive it from the federal government. So that's one important, very real, critical thing for us right now. And then I'm just personally deeply concerned about the revocation of under Title IX of any notion of students who are non-binary or transgender being protected under the title that protects students from sexual discrimination. And so that is a particular issue that's of great concern to me. As Mark noted, the main point of the Department of Education and these grants is to protect the underserved in our student populations. And we're incentivized to do that with this funding, but it provides checks which go through the state. It's this notion that they're really on about. This chapter read like the oldest critiques we've been experiencing in public education. My whole career, these are the things we've been talking about. So
very similar arguments through all the different editions going back to 1979, because of course I did a comparison of all of them because I'm insane. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, issues of choice and states' rights. I mean, states' rights is very close to a dog whistle about race and racism, and let's stop enforcing any kind of legal interruption of institutional racism. That's what, when they say states' rights, that's what they mean. And so this notion that they've taken something away from the state is really misleading, because the money comes through the states, and the states are required then to expect districts to follow a plan to disrupt any of the inequities in their own system, and for that we receive the money. So there is local control, state control, and federal oversight through all of this. To remove the federal oversight part is to basically hand money to politicians who would do whatever they will. I'm in Arizona. We're ground zero for choice, at least the kind of choice that the Heritage Foundation likes. And we're seeing right now huge amounts of money is being siphoned off of the public system to go into vouchers and highly unregulated charter schools. So, so far, the claim from the early days of right-wing choice that this would actually improve outcomes for underserved populations has not proven to be true. So I don't trust the notion that the competition system is going to better things for us. It hasn't thus far, and I've been living it my entire career in Arizona. So,
may I ask a follow-up question about the impact funding?
yes.
Because it's not developed, I'm using air quotes there. Is that to offset like the property taxes that typically fund schools in more
Yes.
like residential commercial areas? Is that what you meant?
Yes.
I really don't.
So we can't tax. Typically, it's most often it's Native American reservations, and if you have a large like military base or federal land inside your school district, we can't tax that. So this helps us offset those losses.
Got it. Very cool. There's a story that actually, with a contract that I worked with your friend Mark, Amy, my friend Amy, Mark, and I have the same friend, is what I'm trying to say. There is, my dogs are getting in a fight behind me. I was so frustrated at some point, I screamed at a CEO. And by screamed, I mean definitely raised my voice, but didn't yell because I was probably wearing Spanx, and said that you can't spit polish a landmine. And it doesn't matter how good at spit polishing you are, if it's not the right activity, it's the wrong activity. And the wrong activity at the wrong time could actually make things even more dangerous. And when Lance, when you were talking about it, like, again, I really did cross-reference back to 1979. And I feel like, as someone who does not have children, I have never had to make choices about where my school or my kids go to school. I don't remember having a choice of where I did go to school, except for like college and graduate school. And I went to the first place I was accepted. That was the choice. The idea that doing this independent, unregulated voucher system harder, more, and longer seems to invoke spit polishing a landmine, because it hasn't worked yet. 1979 was a long time ago, and it hasn't worked yet. It hasn't worked through other Republican presidents. It hasn't worked through Republican governors or Democratic governors or Democratic presidents. But here we are. Do you have any idea why this is such an obsessive fix, other than it segregates school districts and people get to go to the schools that their money pays for? Because that's the only thing I can think of.
I'll hop in. Just, I want to say that we've had these programs since, we started with testing in the 70s, and then we started to have programs in 79. We had No Child Left Behind. We all know how those worked out. But our education system currently is doing exactly what it's designed to do, and that is to have haves and have-nots. And this further cements that reality. With the abolishment of the Department of Education, which is definitely proposed and something that I see coming any day now, based on the way that it has already followed through with many other promises, that will also be the abolishment of Head Start.
Oh, that's on the list.
Is such a crucial program for young children in our nation. Those kids who will not be getting Head Start will be entering school so significantly behind their peers. And even with the addition of Head Start, they are already going into a system that is stacked against them and that is keeping them pushed down. So taking that away is it's just putting a fault, not a fissure, not a crack, but an enormous gaping fault in between students who are coming to school with parents of any sex, of any marital status, of any standing, parents who are able to provide their kids with books and speak words to them, and they're taking the children who have parents who are working and who don't have the resources for a really high quality preschool or for Head Start, and they're absolutely handicapping them.
And to be clear, in the DHHS chapter, Head Start in the first paragraph is not changed or discounted or made smaller to be more efficient because of it's gone, just gone. There's no need for it. Mark, you were going to say something.
Yes, and so we should also think about the history of these other programs, if you will, going back all the way to the days of Brown versus Board of Education, 1954. There were a number of parents who said, white parents who said, my kids are not going to go to school with black kids, and in cases when, I mean, it ranged. I mean, it ranged from, we've heard about one district that closed the public schools down for 2 years rather than have them integrated. And so when that happened, what the state government came back and said was, hey, you parents, we got some special vouchers that you can go to, or we got a special school that the white parents can go to, but we're not going to worry about those black kids. And so you can go to school and we got opportunities for you. And so we have this proliferation of all kinds of options that you can choose. And so fast forward to today, and they quote this, they love to quote Milton Friedman and say, oh, there needs to be a free market system and education needs to work. What I would argue, Jess, is in many ways it is working for those white parents when who have money, who have access. So take a voucher program, for instance. Now this, they're going to say, all right, we're going to put the program into the system, and what they use is the faces of a lot of poor kids of color to say we want them to have options. The public school's not working for them, but in reality, what we look at when we look at the stats behind this is really being taken advantage of by those parents who more often than not are white, wealthy parents who want particular kind of vouchers to send their kids to private schools or schools that they choose or religious schools or whatever the case. And they want to use public money for that. And so we have to watch that. We've seen a increasingly conservative court is becoming more friendly and open to this kind of option. And so when we say these choices are there, it's kind of like pulling the wool over parents' eyes, because it's not only that they're taking advantage of these programs, it's not necessarily easy to figure out how to take advantage of getting your voucher money to go to a school. And then you have to have transportation to get to wherever that school is, which more often than not are not located in schools where you have a large number of kids living in poverty who are of color. So we have to kind of think about what that reality is and what the aspiration is and what it looks like in reality when it actually plays out and we see it and look at the actual numbers.
Yeah.
Lance, you're making...
Yeah, please. Yeah. I mean, what Mark just said is so critical. It's maybe one of the most nefarious parts of the whole choice narrative is that this is designed to help students with limited means. And that's not at all the history of it. And it's not the reality of it. Exactly as Mark laid out, if you're a one or two parent family with 3 or 4 jobs between these two parents, and you're doing everything you can to put a roof over your head and keep food on the table and stay alive, you may not have the means of driving your child across town at the time that school starts. But parents who have one full-time parent or enough income that they can shuttle their children around and not worry about federally funded transportation. One of the title funds that comes to our district pays for transportation for many of our students. If you don't have those access, then the school that is your option is the one that's closest to your home. So, but I think there's another part of this that is quite sinister, and that's this notion that the money that we're paying in taxes, or as a parent, that's my money attached to my child. And so I want to take that as some sort of tuition and pay for school somewhere. So what that does is it elevates individualism above the community. And it suggests that, so when you start pulling people out of your local school, they no longer have any vested interest in the improvement of that local school. I mean, I can go wherever I want. And this is my money. Well, it's not really. It's we're in this together, and if we're committed to the common good and lifting up the quality of life for all of our children, then we want everybody invested in the quality of the schools that are nearby. And when people can just opt out, they lose that vested interest, and That's not an accident. That's not a byproduct. That's an intentional part of this.
I-
It's also, in Arizona, there are a limited number of private schools where students could go anyway. So it's not like everybody could just lift up and go to these private schools, nor would the $7,000, this is how much we get per pupil in Arizona. It's the lowest funded state in the country at times. The $7,000 isn't going to do a lot to pay for the $20,000 or $25,000 a year tuition to a private school, which means what is actually happening is that the people who are already at the private school are getting a $7,000 break on their tuition, and we're losing money in the school system. Nobody is actually moving anywhere except a limited number of people with means, as Mark said. So this is,
Yeah.
this is an old, we've known this, but you can use the narrative of choice as a way to disguise what's actually happening.
Right. Well, interestingly, the narrative of choice follows suit throughout the whole book around focusing on private business, private sector, free market economy. Milton Friedman, definitely everywhere. But what I want to say about Lance, what you just said, and then we're going to get to notes. What the hell does this chapter actually say? Which we're talking about. So we're doing great. First thing I want to say, and I think this is because I have no kids, right? I couldn't tell you what elementary school is closest to my house. I have no idea. I have no idea. Do I have a middle school near me? Do I have a high school? I think we have one high school in I live in a small town. I think we have one high school, but we probably have like feeder middle schools and feeder elementary school. I don't even know. I have no idea. We could write that down as one of the things to do. Where are your local schools, right? I know that there is a hippy trippy charter school because I've done a training there, right? But it's in the town over, so I don't even know if my little town has a hippie. I'm sure it does, but I don't know that it does. So that's the first thing I would say. When y'all were talking, what it made me think of, and I think this is important to state, just to understand mindsets that we're talking about here, right? When Lance, when you talked about like the funding is our school, the closest I have heard people understand that the funding is about our neighborhood would maybe be that the better that school is doing, the easier it is to recruit better. I'm using air quotes for those of you not watching the video, procrastinating, putting your dishes away. Put your dishes away, but I'm using air quotes. Better schools, better property values. Maybe that's an argument of like our neighborhood schools, even if we're busing our kids or having the nanny drive our kids to some other place. Maybe. What it made me think of was, again, back to COVID, when there weren't enough ventilators. I live in a very small town, so there was a public announcement that my teeny tiny town owned 2 ventilators for the entire county at the beginning of COVID. That was not something I knew to care about until it became apparent I should care about this. And simultaneously, there are rich people who live in my town who were buying their own ventilators to have in their house in case they needed them. So I'm just going to use this as an example, is that some of us are thinking bigger. Some of us are taking care of ourselves. And that third is, I didn't know I was supposed to think about this. And I think there's a lot of stuff in this education chapter that is stuff that I truly did not know I should be thinking about, because I'm not a teacher anymore, and the closest entry point I have is when I taught high school. So I just want to kind of name that. So pause the video, get a snack. Now let's actually really get to thinking about it. Is that a safe start? Okay, hopefully they have unpaused the video and your dishes are away. Buckle up. All right, so I took some notes. There's also, we're going to go through the Stop the Coup 2025 summary, which I think does a very good job. There's like 5 main bullets. So I'm going to read the 5 main bullets, and then I'm going to start through. We've already talked about some of the things that I pointed out. Personal favorite, burning a hole in my pocket just for fun. Not that any of you asked, but of any of the chapter. A woke diversicrat. That's me. I didn't even know, but now I know. You know how you need language sometimes to describe what you are or what you're not? I think I'm supposed to be offended But I think what I'm really going to do is start an intramural softball team called the Woke Diversicrats. That's me. I'm a woke diversicrat. Just needed to get that out of my system. Okay, 5 points according to Stop the Coup about the chapter. There's a lot more we can talk about, but we're going to kind of focus around these things. Otherwise, everybody's going to blow their heads off. Too soon to talk about that. Okay, injure themselves in an unintended way. Is that better? No. Chapter 11, key points. Number 1, cut the Department of Education. That really should just be the end of the sentence, but they did give us some more words. Cut the Department of Education as a cabinet level agency, reorder the chain of command, and put loyalists in charge. Now, in every single video, I have said these 2 sentences. Number 1, the biggest priority here is the private market. The second biggest priority is nonpartisan civil servants who are loyal to the president's agenda. It is true. That is not what that word nonpartisan means, but that is the sentence that they are using. We're prioritizing loyalty to the president's agenda. I don't know that they believe there will be a different president with a different kind of agenda. They're just shooting for this president, this agenda for forever. That's what they want to do. Bullet number 2, redirect federal dollars to state and local governments, champion alternatives to liberal higher education schools, private charter, trade, technical, and faith-based institutions. So we already talked a little bit about kind of redirecting those federal dollars. And somehow I picture like the tubes at Costco when they like put the cash register stuff up and it like away, right? Like this also used to be like bank deposit things. I'm dating myself. I'm a Gen Xer. But this is going to be into your home and you're just going to get $7.14 because that's your individual's kid allocation of the 7% trickling down. It's probably going to lead to more kids because then maybe you'll get $21. Focus. Reverse Biden's student loan forgiveness program and crack down on loan enforcement. Here's a fun idea. And I'm not going to lie, I've been batting around in my head and I'm kind of excited about it, but I'm alone. I am very aware that I'm alone. If a private company were to take on all the loans, typically speaking, when loans are sold to another loan provider, they renegotiate the terms, they renegotiate the APR, the balances don't transfer over, they're terrible with paperwork. So then you actually can say, please give me something in paper that tells me what my balance is. And sometimes they don't even know what the balance is because there's so many loans. We live in a world based on credit and paper. So if this were to happen, a private business take over student loans, I'm just going to say it is possible. I don't know if it's probable, but it's possible that the loan forgiveness would never be called loan forgiveness, but they might screw it up. I think my money is on them screwing it up. So I see hope. I'm looking for hope, and it could be glimmering off of a metal bullet, but a glimmer is a glimmer. Take it where you can. 2 more bullets. Eliminate equity and diversity regulations in Title IX and 6 rules. And then it specifies SOGI, sexual orientation and gender identity, and CRT, critical race theory. Fun facts, they have no idea what those things mean. Little baby glimmer of hope. It actually says sexual orientation and gender identity. Like there is some acknowledgement that those things are different than biological sex. Like my work here is done. I've been fighting for this recognition for decades to the point that it is included in exactly who to hate. I'm so proud. I'm so proud. Okay, last bullet. Set up a parental savings account program to fund parents' school choice, boost parental control of classroom discussions, and disclosure of school information to parents. There is a whole section on parent rights, and even if we go long, we got to talk about parent rights and what that means. That is what this chapter talks about. Now, there's a lot of things that could be covered or could be drawn out more, or as discussed by our experts, because I'm the idiot on this recording, the implementation of some of these ideas and what the effects are downstream. But because we're eliminating the EPA, we don't have to pay attention to what happens downstream. Nobody cares down there. It's fine. It's totally fine. So, fellow woke diversicrats, my understanding of the Department of Education is that it is supposed to support teaching and non-teaching staff. That is the most apolitical definition I could find about what the Department of Ed is supposed to do. It does a lot of other things. There's lots of other side projects, etc. But I just want to kind of like stop there, mention a couple of offices that are part of the Department of Education. At least they were last week. I haven't watched the news today. Elementary and secondary education, for people paying attention, that's like preschool to 5th grade, middle school's like 6th to 8th grade, junior high is usually 9th, 10th, high school's 11th and 12th. Yes, I looked that up to make sure I was right. Career, technical schools, and adult education, special education and rehabilitation services, post-secondary education, which would be potentially junior college or community college, undergraduate or graduate school, also can include HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities, as well as land grant institutions, state institutions. Junior colleges are usually 2-year institutions, and tribally controlled post-secondary education, or tribally controlled lower education, high schools, middle schools, elementary schools, general education services, federal student aid, and the Office of Civil Rights, which, if it was, this is another little glimmer of hope, cut it. But if you can't cut it, then it should be focusing on rolling back any inclusion related to non-binary anything, and should come out with a very strict statement specifically about sports participation based on biological sex upon birth between female and male only. What have I missed?
You read the same thing I did. Sounds like you didn't miss any of the highlights, at least.
All right, well, that's good to know. Has it crossed anybody's mind that Linda McMahon is the person who's going to be running this? Anyone? Just thought I'd ask. Phoning in for a friend. Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, I guess, it goes back to the point you made earlier, which is it's not about qualifications, right? If it's not about this idea of, I don't know, a free market, or what your first point was about making money, it's the second, is this person a loyalist? And this is clearly a loyalist to the administration, to the president. So qualifications go out the window. And so what's really been interesting is I don't know, I saw some reporting, I guess for some reason or another, I would love to know why, but then I don't need to know why. They showed the report started, but she was being a power driver. She was being power driven, I guess, by a wrestler. So I said, what part of this makes, I don't know, but then they just like, this will be your new Secretary of Education. So but it was just, it's just this thing of, to have such limited qualifications, to have, I think, maybe limited to a very short period of time on a board of education, to have unsuccessfully have run for a public office, but just to be loyal to the president is all that's there. But we got to look at what is the true purpose. This was never about running the Department of Education correctly. This was about who can go in, and the word that they're using is disruptor. We need a disruptor. And what that means is, this is the person whose job it is to break apart the department according to the wishes of the president and the administration. So I think that's exactly the kind of person you want, who has some association with whatever corporation or business or WWE or whatever it is. Doesn't have anything to do with qualifications, because this is not something that they're looking to see keep around a very long time, in my view, at least not in this current iteration.
I think it's actually helpful to kind of swallow that bite, right? Like, you don't have any liquids, it's not going to be an easy swallow. But if ultimately this person is loyal to the president and their number one charge is go dismantle, then the qualifications or understanding the vocabulary is not really required.
Right.
So there is a little pinko commie, sorry, not pinko commie, woke diversicrat part of me that's like, but wait, they've never even been a teacher. How are they going to relate? A bulldozer doesn't need to relate.
Right.
And actually, I would assume the more that they could relate, the harder it's going to be to actually dismantle anything.
Right.
Just a guess. Jennifer, it looked like you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I was just agreeing with you. The more difficult it is if you know them. And to your point of wokeness, I feel like the disruption is that we want to unwoke everyone. So we don't want any understanding, we don't want empathy, we don't want differences. We want to just keep it. I can't, Handmaid's Tale is just in my brain and I can't get it out.
Mm.
And it
Yeah.
just is, we want the world to be like that. And
this is my attempt to be empathetic and charitable. There's not going to be a lot of them in this chapter, but I'm going to keep trying. But Jennifer, with a point that you bring up that I think is important is that when, like, for example, the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, affirmative action, when we throw that stuff out the window, I would love to live in a world where we don't have to babysit people's bias. That would be incredible. Sign me up. And I think the required sleepiness, right? Like, to me, I would love a nap. I've been up for 12 hours already. I would love a nap, but I can't take a nap because we don't live in a world where that kind of watchdogness for our better good isn't needed. Now, if it wasn't needed, which we in theory are all working towards our woke diversicrat unemployment, not that we're going to get unemployment, don't get excited about that, that's gone too. But if we're working towards our unemployment because we don't need these watchdog things anymore, because we actually are having an equitable experience, I will gladly go back to sleep. But that's not here, right? So I have a specific question, and I don't know which one of you are going to be interested in taking this on. But there's two different unions that are mentioned inside of this chapter. P.S. This is a hard transition. One is the NEA, the National Education Association, I believe. National Education Administrators Association.
Association.
Good job. And then Association of Teaching,
American Federation of Teachers. It's American Federation of Teachers.
That one's a little embarrassing to me because my mother started the chapter in Texas, ATF. I remember the banner in the garage, at least in North Dallas. So sure, get rid of unions, because why would we be pro-labor? And unions exist to fight against administration, which makes it bad for business. All right, I can swallow that pill. Why are there two unions? How do they differ, and what part of education are they both advocating for that would need us to need both of them? Or is this just a Montague Capulet situation?
Yeah, I'm happy to
Right.
start at least. I won't be the only.
Idea.
I mean, I won't have a complete answer, but I mean, the American Federation of Teachers goes back a long way and has its roots in the more what we think of as a union. It's directly affiliated with the AFL-CIO. It sees itself and has always seen itself primarily as a labor union for educators. And the National Education Association has made the effort for a long time to bill itself as the professional association for educators, to professionalize education, maybe akin to the bar or the a medical board. But they've had differences, and at states and federal level, they've at times felt closer and further apart. There, I would say that in many ways they don't disagree on the key points. The NEA has been really assertive in disrupting racial inequality in education and among educators. That's been a central move of theirs. And lately they've been more, my experience has been that they've been more philosophically aligned. So it really does depend on the state. I mean, and because while at the federal level, there's there may be one level of difference, and in a state they're going to be either more or less activist oriented or conservative, depending on their membership.
Got it.
But it's I mean, the message was clear. It's the opening message from in Project 2025 is that unions have leveraged their unbelievable amount of power and influence to destroy education, and they have a vested interest in the DOE continuing to exist so they can continue to siphon off money. It's an absurd point of view,
Well,
and it's just missed. And
teachers are highly overpaid.
you're right. I mean, the whole thing, and I mean, this does feel. I want to mention something. We'd be remiss if we didn't acknowledge that there are challenges in public education, and there are tons of things we could be doing better. They take that little nugget, the notion that everybody has, that we could be doing a little better in public education, and then use that to say, so let's get rid of the only oversight organization that exists that would in fact push to make us better at the things we care about. They even in their charts they show, I think they're proposing that we're failing, but if you look at the charts that they show from 1990 to 2017, we're significantly improving. And then 17 to 22 we see a dip, but like there was an international pandemic, and us coming out of that is likely, but there's an upward trajectory of improvement since the establishment of the DOE. So this notion that we're failing is absurd.
That is an interesting thing. I actually forgot about that. It actually has bar charts that it's using, or line graphs, if we're being specific, that show exactly what they are not talking about. And there's a vibe through the book, like if I get to be like a literary critique for just a second, that it's a collection of Post-it notes that someone stapled together. And so like these line graphs, these are not doing what you think they are doing, but thank you for including line graphs. But I'm actually reading, right? Like I didn't just go, ooh, evidence, next page. I actually, it's fascinating. All right.
Yeah.
If we keep doing this hot potato thing, because we have a lot of little topics we have to talk about and we're running out of time. So Jen, I'm going to call on you next. I'm just guessing that you are going to take this topic. If someone else is like, no, me, claim hot potato. I would like to spend a little second on school meals. Yes. Now, here's something that's important, and I honestly can't remember if it's just this chapter or if it is also the USDA chapter. So the amount of fraud that exists and people stealing free meals, breakfast, lunch, snacks, and some places even have a summer meal program, and that food is not an entitlement. Spoiler alert, it actually specifies in a different chapter that food is in fact an entitlement. But again, the Post-it notes did not talk to each other. What is fascinating to me is the people that it identifies as committing this fraud are the rich people who could afford their own food.
Yes.
Yeah, there's poor people. But the rich people are stealing the food. So if we just make all breakfast available, all lunch available, all afternoon snack available, and summer, those people who could afford their own food are going to get free food. And that is an expense that is wasteful. That is the basic nutshell. Can you, Jennifer, I randomly pick you. Mark, you're next on accreditation. Can you please glue my brain back together on rich people stealing food and at being a duplicative or wasteful thing because food is not an entitlement? And so we should get rid of it when it also acknowledges that there are people who do not eat 3 meals a day.
Well, how about if we get rid of the people who are creating fake feeding sites and taking the money from it? I mean, there was a huge scandal in Minnesota actually where that happened, and they siphoned off tons of money and they weren't being fed. But the right of children to have food, free and reduced lunch is what keeps so many of our kids fed and living. And they, schools do more than just feed them breakfast and lunch, sometimes dinner. We send bags home over the weekend so that the kids have things to eat over the weekend. We feed them over the summertime. And if you want to say that food isn't an entitlement, stop eating for a week or so. Or only eat graham crackers or mac and cheese, or like only do that for a week and then tell me that it's not a right to be fed,
Mm.
especially when you're attending a public institution such as school, where your ability to function is based on the things on the hierarchy of needs. You have to feel safe, you have to be fed, and
Mhm.
we're taking those things away.
Right. What would help test scores that evidently somebody somewhere is very worried about is a clear mind and a full belly, but not if you can afford it on your own, because that's wasteful. So again, I don't know what kind of micromanaging accountant is going to be helping with this wasteful thing. Evidently, it's Elon Musk. That it hurt my soul to see wealthy kids being used as the wasters
Yeah.
that would then, at the expense of it acknowledging a need and then tying it to the importance of testing scores and like competing with other countries. Like, did you hear all that other stuff? Like, it really, that part really hurt. Am I missing something? It just is hurtful.
It is. It just is hurtful.
All right. Well, thanks for clearing that up. All right. Next bullet. Um, accreditation. What a racket. Mark, please explain, what is accreditation? Sure, I'm sure there's some pay the money, get approved thing, but because it's run through the Department of Education, obviously it is not loyal to an agenda. Although I'd like to point out that if they're looking at schools that are loyal to an agenda, determining if one is or is not could be part of this loyalist agenda priority accreditation system. But I digress. What do childless people who don't even know anything about a school need to know about accreditation? Why is it good? Where, and much like what Lance said, what maybe needs to be reformed, sure, but not thrown out.
Yeah, yeah, and I'll start this one out and invite anybody, my other colleagues to jump in. I think this accreditation for them really comes back to, this idea of we want to have accredited institutions when we start thinking about the federal government and the amount of money that's going to these institutions, and also the federal government having some control over what people do based on whether we will allow you to have access to financial aid systems. So, for instance, if you're not going to be an accredited institution and you're going to be a private, startup by night, I don't know, maybe you could be called Trump University or something. Who knows? And then you could just say, students, come here, give me money. You can even fill out a FAFSA. You can get federal money and to go to school and graduate. And by the way, realize that degree you got, it really doesn't mean anything because we were doing a lot of things in classes just really kind of our opinion. It doesn't matter. Oh, oops, sorry, you didn't need protection from the federal government on that, did you? I mean, you needed to make an individualist decision on your own, and you needed to choose on your own, and we can't help you. And by the way, that loan that you have, it's not at all forgivable because you're going to need to pay that because we might even be considering selling that to another private industry so that it can make even more money. So this is where we there was a period of time when again there was an increase in the number of these private. It sounded better because it was called like these private institutions are popping up and they're here to support people and free choice, and but it was like they forgot that part about whether it should be accredited, and then this is looked at as another burden from the federal government. Why can't I just have my own institution and run it, and it's free enterprise, it's a free market, and I want to start my institution? Why do I have to be beholden to the federal government? Well, I've kind of given the answer to the question I've asked, and that's it. They want a limited amount of regulation, and this is another way to be burdened by this Department of Education because after all, we can take that out of the department and put it somewhere else anyway. We don't need to worry about that.
I really appreciate you playing this hot potato game because I feel like I could talk about each of these little bullet points ad nauseum. The only thing I would add that showed up is that by changing these regulations and accreditation standards as well, it is intentionally highlighting religious rights and religious schools to be able to deny who can go there and what kind of religions are practiced inside the schools versus a separation of church and state and a free education to everyone.
Right.
That's
right.
the only thing I'd add.
Yeah, no, I just, when you said, I was thinking Bob Jones University popped in my head.
Mhm.
So yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, Lance, I'm coming for you.
Oh, there we go.
All right. So you already brought it up originally, but when we start talking about Title IX, so I actually forgot what her real name is, but the Department of Education person who I referred to as Mrs. Umbridge during the first Trump administration.
Betsy
Her.
DeVos.
Betsy DeVos.
Betsy DeVos, good job. Mrs. Umbridge, I think is appropriate. The rolling back of what Title IX can do, in my understanding, if we talk about gender in sports, we talk about gender on campus. If we talk about sexual assault investigations, specifically, no one, we don't believe a potential survivor because 1% of people who file claims that then get investigated were lying, right? Something like that. Also, the same way that the investigations are done, at least on a college campus, if I remember correctly, the rollbacks also roll back the jurisdiction of campus police versus the local municipality police. So if you're doing something that would be deemed illegal on a college campus, there is a possibility that it would be handled internally in the bubble of campus and not actually legally with the community, that there's a line between there. And that may be coming from my student affairs experience, but I dealt with a lot of things that were technically illegal, but because they were in a residence hall, I, who am not a police officer, handled it through judicials. Title IX rollbacks really impacted that kind of bubble of community or safety on campus. What do people need to know about Title IX, and what kind of conversations do we need to be having about what the rollbacks or more severe implications are? Title IX, go Lance.
Yeah, I mean, I'll open with saying I'm not an expert in this, but just to build on some of the things you said, we obviously, as a school district, we have all kinds of things that misbehaviors that are one student or one person doing something to another student that they shouldn't do. Once it gets elevated to a level of a Title IX investigation, which under the most recent Biden letter does include students who are non-binary or transgender. So if they're being targeted for that, now it gets to a level of seriousness where an investigation follows some pretty precise steps, and people's rights are protected, including the rights of the accused, the person who's being accused of doing this. So it's a very serious investigation, and some of it is out of the site administrator's hands. But at the heart of all of this is the protection of populations of students who have not prior to this been protected by the system as it is in its default original creation. So women is the original group of people who are being supported and protected under Title IX. And we saw huge advancements as a result of this. But as a culture, as a society, come to understand that the notions that gender and biological sex are not the same thing, that these are constructs and have a lot of complexity to them and nuance, and students are figuring these things out as they reach adolescence, I think it's incumbent upon us to be protective of those students for those identities that they hold. And if we roll this back, well, first of all, let me just say, I know that the people here know this, I'm sure, many people listening would know this, but this is really one, in terms of the mental health and mental wellness of our young people, this is one of our most vulnerable populations. And so the recognition that these students should have particular protection because they don't identify the way other people think they should, is not just about any incident. This is about suicide prevention. This is about making students feel that their whole self, the way they are, is welcome and safe in our schools. So we have to continue this path, whatever the rules are. We have to continue this path because our children deserve to be protected from the onslaught of messages that harm their mental health. So I'll stop there for now because I'm sure my colleagues could add more to it. Or Jess, if you wanted to ask something more precise or.
Well, no, it's helpful. The way that things, again, these post-it notes, right? Like these things are really big concepts, and they're just thrown out like a line or a paragraph. So if someone was stupid enough to read this, it's stupefying, no pun intended, because each one of these things, I'm like, wait a minute, what is that again? Wait a minute, what is this again? So I appreciate the hot potato, and each one could be its own giant conversation, you know. And so even if it's just kind of being touched on, these regulations or guidances, which they do not generally like regulations and guidances because they're not the law, but they like guidances and regulations if it's loyal to the agenda. But if it's a guidance or regulation that's not loyal to the agenda, then they see it as peer pressure. And in the same time, they don't like TikTok because it's putting pressure on the kids. Right? But like, yeah, so kids are putting pressure on kids. Teachers are putting pressure on kids. Kids are putting pressure on teachers. Like that, it's just such a constant frustration to me that I don't understand how it's so sticky, I think is the language that I want to use, right? Is that I went to breakfast shortly after the election with a very good friend of mine, and says, "Oh, I don't do politics," because I was like, "How are you doing after the election?" She's like, "I don't do politics. Doesn't matter." And I was like, "Oh, okay." I was like, "Were there any issues that like showed up?" She has two young kids. She's married. We have very different lives, right? And she's like, "Well, I'll tell you one thing. If my fourth grader comes home and talks to me about gender affirming surgeries being performed in the nurse's clinic again, I'm going to be really sick." And I was like, your nurse at your school can't give a Tylenol without your permission. Like, what? Like, you're a smart person, right? And I recognize that there's like a mama bear thing that happens as soon as you start talking about your own kids. I just don't, I'm not brave enough to have children. So here we are, right? So when we start talking about protections for the vulnerable, I don't understand why those that are in power would possibly be harmed by extending protections for the most vulnerable. I intellectually understand it. I've read the books. I have this weird job, but I don't know why it's just such an easy stickiness to get people on the bandwagon of like, yeah, let's go after the weekend.
I honestly don't think that's not, I mean, I hate to be too conspiratorial here, but the move for all of this is to protect the free market. That this whole thing is about siphoning money from any kind of public system into the hands of the wealthy. That's what this is about. And these kinds of things where they pit us, like there's no better way to trigger somebody's amygdala than to get them thinking about harming the children that are being harmed somehow. So this is just fear mongering and baiting. It's I mean, it's a distraction from what's really happening. But it's a distraction with incredibly harmful consequences to vulnerable children.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think this is, I'll just say this really quickly. And I said earlier, a similar thing, and that this is really a direct, bold, unabashed approach where they're using vulnerable populations as the target. They're really making them the enemy, right? Based on the fear of the unknown. And so you
That's right.
start seeing sexual orientation, gender identity. So for that, just when they throw that term, the first thing they say, we don't know what that is. Oh my God, that's scary. And so that's what they said. This is scary. This is scary. This transgender, we're not quite clear what, but transgender is scary. And guess what? They're making your kids scary in schools. So when your friend says, I don't do politics, but they better not be performing those surgeries, your friends are obviously being impacted by this political approach, right? Of fear. And so this is, I think, what they've managed to do very, very well. And it goes to this space of what they were describing prior to the election. This is these people who were described as, this is a news term, low information voters. Like they didn't have all the facts and they didn't put everything together in a logical way. You know, this is where the post-it notes work. But they were presented in this with such scary terms that they felt like they had to react to protect something about them that they were going to lose. And so I think we just have to say that. And then the last thing I'll say, building on to Lance's point earlier, this vulnerability that happens in reality for kids who say, you know, I'm identifying, you know, as gay in my school. We know in reality, even before we get to the conversation about suicide, that those are the kids who are being bullied the most. Those are the kids, you know, who are being really excluded in many ways. But the conversation has been flipped on its head. And so it's not about reality. It's just about these fear tactics, and they're using the policy to just talk about that and divorcing it actually from reality.
Because
I mean,
when you can't take responsibility, then what you have to do is have a sense of othering. It's the others. And, you know, they make everything their fault. And I do want to say that one of the first things that he did was sign Executive Order 14166, which already is defining sex as the biological sex assigned at conception. It's reversed policies in place that recognize gender identity under Title IX. It's redefining and it's limiting access to facilities and participation in sports. It's here, it's happening. And, you know, people in education have to figure these things out as the game is changing.
Yeah, the one, I think it's very important for, if my following, whatever that means, the weirdos watching this, right? All 8 of you, is that I'm not the one saying that, right? Like, these are actual on the ground educators and administrators and teachers. And I wanted them to hear that, right? To Jennifer, to your point, and then I have one more hot potato, because we're over an hour, but we're almost done with the hot potato list. So thank you very much, Jennifer. You have a head cold. Thank you for hanging in there. Hot potatoes, parental rights. That's where we're going. But Jennifer, to your point about the executive order, there's nothing about that executive order specifying female and male at the point of conception, and there's only 2 and federal documents. There's nothing not scary in that thing. However, the way that the system currently works is that it doesn't go into effect if it is immediately adjudicated. So there, of course, are tons of cases happening right now. So this is not happening on the ground immediately, except some people don't know that. And so they are very excited to get it rolling, right? So that's a tension piece. Also, it's not about biology, because if it was about biology, every fertilized egg is female until it actually experiences some kind of burst of testosterone through development so that male can happen. So technically speaking, everybody's going to be in a female bathroom. That is not what they meant. That is not what they meant. And not meaning something and having very excited, uneducated, low information people able to implement something is creating more fear and more chaos. And so my job, I feel like, is to acknowledge there's scary chaos happening and to try not to add to it. So, like, if you feel like you are stirring up chaos, chances are there is, statistically speaking, if you are feeling fear and chaos, you are probably in a position of power and don't know what those words mean, to quote kind of Mark. The people who are most endangered have been feeling fear and chaos for a very long time. They're a little more familiar with that feeling. So if it's relatively new, like check your own dominance and resources. And like I like to say is pay attention to your argument and are you protecting the weakest person? If you are not protecting the weakest person, you're trying not to get out of your comfort zone, which is a thing, but it's not the same thing. So thank you for my little TED talk. I yell at people for doing like tariff TED talks in the middle of Target. Nobody is prepared for that. That's why we seem condescending, because we're being condescending. So there you go. Okay. Parental rights. Now, my entry point to this, because I'm like, I don't understand. If you really, really, really wanted to dictate exactly what your kid learned, homeschool. That's available to you. If you don't want to homeschool, let go. Isn't Elsa, isn't that a kid's movie? Let it go. Let experts do their jobs. We don't really do that anymore. And we've literally overturned even the Chevron case where we don't allow actual experts to weigh in on what kind of damage is happening. That's EPA versus Chevron. Chevron, a private business, of course knows what its impact is on the environment way more than the EPA does. This is how I entered this section of this chapter, right? Thank God I don't have kids. So here's my thoughts of connecting the end of FERPA and PPRA, which I have forgotten what it stands for, and how that is linked to parental rights. So in the days, practically the 1900s, when I worked on campuses, I ran LGBT centers before it was legal to be gay. So there is a part of me that's kind of like, roll your sleeves up. We've done this through 4 different Bush terms and a Trump term. We got this. But I don't know how naive that is, because maybe it's going to be worse this time. But I thought that 5 other times before. But when a parent would call me and want to know about students that I may or may not have been seeing in my office for whatever reason, I couldn't even acknowledge that I would know who that student was, if they were enrolled on campus, if they had classes, or if they ever saw me. Because, and I would tell the parents at the time, this worked timeline wise in the early 2000s, but I would tell the parents, do you remember during like Vietnam when you were fighting for your rights to like be seen as an adult because you were old enough to be drafted? Well, you won. And so people who are on a college campus are in this protective little bubble, and I cannot even acknowledge if they are inside that bubble because you are not inside that bubble. Now, those rights could be like checkboxed and waived or something, but frankly, I never even logged in. I just never said anything, certainly because of the job that I had. To me, that's what FERPA is giving somebody on a college campus the privacy and autonomy that grown adults comes to expect. I am not a parent. We've established this. But at some point, my friends that are parents realize their kids have their own sense of agency. And then those parents eventually age, and the kids eventually realize their parents don't have agency anymore. So these roles seem to kind of like flip and change over time and power dynamics. I am sure I'm missing something, because that is my only contribution to this obsession with parental rights about what is being taught, what books are in school, what they have access to. It's their money, that kind of stuff. I'm going to shut up, and please tell me, what do I need to know about it? And the 8 people who are watching this are likely parents. So it's even going to be kind of suggestions about what we need to be doing around our dinner table. Mark, let's start with you.
Okay. So I'll start with your the initial point about parental
My
rights.
word cloud.
Yeah, yes. So there's really like this it's become a buzzword for them, and they really have amplified the parental rights in my opinion. So I'll give you a case in point. So I was working with a school district, and this was a predominantly wealthy school district, made up of, I think it was majority of folks there were white, and there was some DEI work going on, a number of things happening. And so an elementary kid, a boy, wanted to wear a dress to school, and his parents said it was fine, and the teachers like, he wants to wear a dress. But there were parents who actually, other parents saying, my kid can't be around that. That's and so it was this thing of like this is private school, but they were really saying we have parental rights. And I say, they do understand this is a I'm sorry, this is a public school. And I think they were speaking of this in terms of our parental rights says that we should be able to control what happens in the classroom. We should be able to control the curriculum. And so it's this idea that this administration has really made this much bigger. And so, in my opinion, it's a misuse of what FERPA says in terms of just really it's about directory information that they've said, oh no, this in the school, by the way, the teachers and the leaders into the educators are being villainized, right? They made it. This is what they're doing to your kids. They're down there. What the nurses doing gender surgeries in their office. So as a parent, you better watch. And so I'll say all that. I give you a practical example because it doesn't mean that teachers didn't have conversations about what was going on. It doesn't mean that they didn't want to read books in the classroom that talked about introducing elementary kids to concepts where there are conversations about gender and gender identity. It was just that because of people with influence in the district called themselves Christians and said that suggested that this behavior was so aberrant that it was offensive to their Christian beliefs. And it's exactly how, what is your interpretation of that? And so it's the idea that we're going to, again, take the public space but through our parental rights, we're going to make it look very much like a private school. So one of the things you heard when President Trump, even before he got into office, it was just this blanket statement and we're going to put prayer back in schools. Well, for years we had the separation of church and state. No, we're not going to put prayer back in schools. But it's buzzword, it's language for those people who want to privatize public education and make it look more like what we want it to look like. And for them, it's this heterosexual, heteronormative education that looks normal to us without all these things that we find very different and disturbing. So I know that's kind of a longer answer. I'll let my colleagues jump in there. But I think this is how they've sort of bastardized this phrase of parental rights and made it way much bigger, much bigger, I think, than parents certainly have power to do in terms of how much control they have over a very public education.
The only thing I'll add, and then Lance, I'll come for you, and then Jennifer. But when we talk about putting religion back in school too, it does seem to be Protestant-based Christian values, practice, Bible study, things like this that are in the schools. I haven't seen a similar kind of Catholic iteration of Christianity in schools, but maybe it's because I currently live in California. I'm originally from the South. Is there a Catholic leaning too? Is it any kind of Christian, or is it just this kind of Baptist Protestant thing?
It is, and in this space, this was in a southern state. This was actually in Texas. But I will tell you of a case, and I called a principal and had a conversation with him, where a principal provided a prayer room for a student who was Muslim. And so that became who was a Muslim. He was practicing Islam, and he wanted a place. And he tried to explain, that this was within the student's rights, and he wanted to provide. And he said anybody could use the room, but then it became an issue because people started to think, wait a minute, we can't do religious stuff. And they started trying to figure out what the separation of church and state is coming from us as the school, or is this the student's First Amendment right? And so it got clouded because a lot of times when we look to see this, it's very much like you said, Jess. If it's more of more of the kind of Christian definition we have, we think it's okay. Then if it goes beyond that, we get really nervous and start to wonder what can really happen. When in fact, in this particular space, it was Christian parents saying that it was our parental right not to have to experience these things as Christians, which again, very, very, it's model. Hopefully that all makes sense.
It does make sense. I think that that's an important thinking point, right? Is that whether we're talking about freedom of speech or specifically in an education place, the speech that leads to more speech is protected speech. And I draw, it seems to me that there's a correlation between I don't want to be around this thing, whatever the thing is that I either do or don't even know about, versus I want to be immersed in the thing that I like.
Right.
And those are different motivations of how you control a space. And maybe if you do both of them, you're just hitting your goal from both sides. Lance, do you want to jump in?
Just to add a little bit, I'm having trouble with my ear. I'm good. All right. Um, the one thing I want to say is I think this echoes some things that both Mark and Jennifer said before. They're creating a problem where there isn't really one as grand as they're making it into. The notion that that teachers are teaching all of these incredibly threatening ideas and that parents can't know about anything that's happening in the classroom. That's just not even happening. Parents have a lot of ability to know what's happening in a classroom. In most cases, if they really object to a lesson, they can opt their kid out for an alternative lesson if they choose for that. But and I think this is what Mark's getting at, is this notion that by stoking the fear in a small number of people, they can start to think, I need to stop this from happening, not just for me. I need to stop this from happening in the school at all. Because, and then you're just not understanding what a public school is. It's a place of diversity and a place of diverse experiences and cultures, religions, perspectives, ways of identifying. And that's a good thing. That's an asset in our culture. So, but the notion that like there's some really nefarious, I don't know, things happening in a classroom that are all secret and you can't know about them, that's just fear mongering again, and othering to some degree, and it's pitting regular folks against teachers. These teachers who love their kids and these parents who they should have a good working relationship. Anyway, it's not. This is about dividing us down at the level of the community, and it's just not a problem the way they're selling it to their followers.
Yeah. It also makes me wonder, like, where is someone safe? And I know safe is kind of like a big trigger word, no pun intended again, but like there are kids who are safe in their home and experience real trauma at school. There are people who experience safety at school and experience real trauma at home. That also goes for the teachers and the administrators.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them are bullied at work and are safe at home, and some of them are not safe at home, and work is their respite. I mean, it's just the human experience of safety. I feel like gets lost in the conversation a lot. That's where my brain goes. Jennifer, what are your thoughts on all of this? How you doing over there? I'm sorry you have a head.
No, that's okay. In the past, there was an unwritten rule that schools would provide the best possible education for your child. There were two things that would change that. One would be an IEP, one would be a 504 plan. And those things, I don't know where those balloons came from, but yay.
Very
It's
nice.
reaction.
Okay.
If you do a peace sign, you'll get them.
We're getting them. Okay. So now it feels as if we want many, many ways to step in, and for each parent to be able to say, the best possible education will be what I decide for my child, not what you decide, which is the whole notion of public school, is that we're doing the best for your child. And that just doesn't want to be a thing anymore.
Yeah. Do you, each of you, last question, other than, I guess, just to mention this, we don't have to discuss it, but then like parting words, thoughts for what people need to be thinking about or doing in their own communities. The business aspect of schooling, I think, is important, and it does specify, for example, instead of paying for classes by credit hours, moving it to competency-based payment systems, which to me, as someone who writes curriculum, seems like very micromanagey of like which competencies are being covered in which classroom. That and there, of course, is the ongoing trumpets in the background of how much we hate China. We haven't even mentioned China. We're over an hour in. It also specifies the difference between social transition, medical transition, and states. Both are terrible. And preferred name and preferred pronouns should not be used. That doesn't have to be used. The teacher just gets to guess based on what the parent says. I just want to mention that they're in there, right? So regular people, kids or not, regardless of how old their kids are, they who might be watching this who live somewhere. If you had one thing that you would like someone to do, what would that one thing be? I think mine is going to be go figure out where your schools actually are. Maybe bonus, call and see if anybody has any like lunch fee or library debt, and maybe pay off some kids' lunch debts or library book debts. There you go. Those are my two. Who wants to go next?
I'll jump in really quickly. I think, you know, I'll go back to what you said, the woke diversicrat, right? Is that what we are? I
Am I not alone? Mark,
Yeah, you're not
alone.
alone. You're not alone. So
Oh.
I think woke for people is going to have to take on a different meaning. You're definitely going to have to be perceptive. This is not the time to not pay attention. We need to know what the story is. So similar to what you were saying earlier, Jess, and building on Lance's point, we've got to, yes, we've got to go down to the school and see how we can support it, see how we can volunteer, see how we can support teachers. What's lost in this, and we didn't have time to talk about it, is that, you know, we're having a hard time in colleges of education to inspire people to go into teaching. And so what I unfortunately saw in the school district that I worked in and a number of others, and even in our programs, we're experiencing a decrease in the number of folks who are going into education. So for the folks who are going into this and trying to do right, I know we know it's not perfect. We know there are a number of things. We need to teach teachers to be more, certainly more culturally responsive, and we need to work with them and understand how to work with kids who are different from themselves. But we don't need to go into a space where we're now having the federal government say difference is out. You know, that's CRT stuff. And because these teachers are going to know less and they're going to leave the classroom faster. And it's going to have an adverse impact on our education system without us ever realizing how can we compete when we find that everybody's trying to find the door out of here because they're not getting the support that they need. And they're being on the other end, that's one end. And on the other end, they got parents showing up, you know, checking them at every point. Got parents telling kids, film them in the classroom. Look at what who wants to do that? And by the way, the pay is not great. So we got to be really thinking about how do we want to be thought of as a world power. And if education is truly going to be a focus, we've got to stop berating teachers and leaders.
I'm curious, and Lance, I want you to go next, but I'm curious. I didn't think about this, but if you're one of the parents that's getting ready to go to school and raise hell, maybe don't. You know, like maybe go for a walk, take your dog out, right? If you need to, write a letter or an email or something, although I think that can be just as hateful, but maybe just call a friend, complain. You're good at complaining, but you don't need to burn a school down. Anyway, sorry, Lance.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things I'm trying to invite more people into doing or being is, can we be more curious and less certain about everything? I really like Mark's suggestion, like find out what your schools need. And I might just take that, build on that a little bit and say, I mean, if you are curious, since we're talking about the Federal Department of Education and federalism generally, like you can reach out to the school and ask, what do these title funds go to? Because I think that if people find out that it's like getting poor kids to school, having intervention systems for kids who are struggling with learning how to read, having English language learner programs so that we have students who can be emerging bilingual in both their first tongue and in English. Paying for food for kids who can't afford food. I feel like most people, if they find that out, are going to say, "Oh, that's all good. I support that." But I think that low information voter that Mark referenced earlier, that's a problem. I mean, but you don't need to become an expert. Just find out what some of this money pays for, and it's really important things that I think most people would get behind. So be curious and a little less certain.
One of my favorite things about curiosity is you can't be anxious and curious at the exact same time. And I can fall down a rabbit hole of anxiety, and it is debilitating and paralysis making. And so, free, I'll save you a copay. When I'm spiraling in my anxious place, I will ask myself, I wonder how long this one's going to last. I'm curious, how long is this spiral going to occur? And it like immediately starts like deflating that space for me. A week? Oh, really? A whole week? Okay, when's the last time you spiraled out of control for a week? What was happening then? Right? Like curiosity like really does tip that. Send all text.
Right.
We are significantly over an hour, but I think that there was a reason. I really, really appreciate the three of you. I know the DHHS chapter, Sarah Kerr and I held it down. We got it all in an hour, and that was like 4 pages of notes. But between the department,
I don't think we heard Jennifer's like one big takeaway.
It's okay.
Were you skipping?
No, I totally forgot. I'm so sorry.
Mine was reflective of everyone else's. It's ask questions, because if you're concerned, if you think that something is happening, if you didn't see it with your own eyes, call and ask, because the people at school are happy to talk to you, whether or not you have a child there. Just ask them. And they'll
ask questions.
And you'll feel so much better when you find out the answer.
I mean, ultimately, that's what led to this project, right? Is that I didn't understand what it was. I didn't understand how two very different viewpoints were using the same document to really garner a lot of political activity. I didn't know what else was in there that wasn't being used. I asked questions. I could not find it as an audiobook. Like they attempted to make this as inaccessible as possible, I think. Well, I don't celebrate Christmas. So while no one was emailing and calling me, I read this whole damn thing, turned my brain into stroganoff, and now here we are. I'm sorry, Jennifer, for missing you. Lance, 2 points for you for acknowledging that. I really, really think that this chapter, Homeland Security and the Department of Health and Human Services, not that they're more important than other chapters, but they're the ones that us woke diversicrats really seem to be focusing on the most. So if we're going to only focus on these out of the 32, we need to know what they say and we need to know what to do. And I don't even know what I don't know. And I feel smarter now because of the three of you. So thank you. I know you were nervous about being super prepared and perfectionisty. So hopefully this was a good experience for you too. I think anybody who could listen through this is going to actually know how to feel on top of something instead of out of control. And that's going to produce less fear. And that's really the mission here. Thank you very much for your friendship and agreeing to do this, you bunch of weirdos.